Good afternoon and welcome to the Commonwealth Club of California. And you can find us online at commonwealthclub.org, on Facebook and Twitter, and on our YouTube channel. I'm Alan Jones, Dean Emeritus of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, and your moderator for the program. I'm pleased to introduce our special guest, Dr. Issa Gucciardi, founding director of the Foundation of the Sacred Stream, and author of the new book, Coming to Peace, Resolving Conflict Within Ourselves and with Others. Whether it comes in the form of bickering with an irritating co-worker, having a disagreement with a spouse, or arguing with a close friend, or talking about Congress, I was going to add. Don't mind me putting that in, do you? No. Interpersonal conflicts are an inevitable and frustrating part of our modern lives. But how can we eliminate the sense of helplessness and anguish that accompanies these conflicts? What must we do to find true contentedness despite the chaos that surrounds us? How can we be true to ourselves and serve the common good? Dr. Issa Gucciardi, director of the Foundation of the Sacred Stream, says she has hopes for a solution, namely her conflict resolution method outlined in this new book, Coming to Peace. Dr. Gucciardi's method builds on the wisdom of ancient meditation techniques and Buddhist traditions, encouraging us to come together and heal after conflict, while also acknowledging our own role in causing the conflict in the first place. So today we're going to have a conversation about relationships, self-improvement, and finding inner peace in a turbulent world. So please welcome Issa Gucciardi. I wanted to sort of be cosmic at the beginning, you've come along, you've had a long journey to get to this book and your work. What would be your sort of State of the Union address, as it were, in terms of the spiritual state of the nation, and what kind of need you're meeting in the kind of work you're doing?
Well, I think, if you ask any, traditional healing practitioner, any kind of shamanic practitioner, they will always tell you that the problem with the West is that we have become disconnected from our spirits. Mm-hmm. And that we have become disconnected from the earth. And I think the return to the earth and to the earth's values of nurturing and sustenance, self-sustenance, mutuality, I think these are the essence of the Ubuntu practices that I talk about in the book. And which was an earth-based culture in southern Africa. These were earth-based cultures that produced the basic concepts of coming to peace. Of course, you have, with the Iroquois League, you have these 6 tribes that were very much informed by their relationship with the earth, and they were bringing these peacemaking methods forward with the understanding that there needed to be nurturing for everyone, respect for everyone.
Yeah, that's what struck me so healing about the book, and what I enjoyed so much about it was that sense of connectedness.
Right.
And that we've got this isolated kind of, what a friend of mine calls rancid individualism, that we're sort of cut off from one another. Right. And in fact, my quarrel with the culture is similar, is that we can turn even spirituality into a commodity.
Right.
I read about the mindfulness industry.
Right.
And to put those 2 words together was very, very upsetting. You had, though, quite a journey to get to this. I keep thinking of where you lived in Hawaii, Mexico, and Saudi Arabia.
Lebanon.
And that as well. France,
Germany.
Yeah, all those things.
Yeah.
So you come at this with a sense of universal, global sensibility. So what is it then about Buddhism, for example, that seems right for our time?
Well, the thing about Buddhism is that it has, again, those same qualities of this. There's a very strong emphasis on compassion for one another. Loving kindness is emphasized. That I would like to be able to completely trust myself to want the best for you, and I want to be able to trust that you want to have the best for me, right? And this again is that same connectivity that you're talking about, which is inherent in Buddhist thought. Another aspect of Buddhism, which is very, very helpful, is that it actually has a few recipes for helping people find their way back to that place of mutuality, to that place of consensus, to that place of trust and honesty. And it works very much on the individual, changing the way that they approach not only themselves, but the way in which they engage with others.
Yeah, what struck me particularly as we see the manifestation of Buddhism here in California and in the West is its generosity, the spirit that I, as a Christian, want to be a Buddhist, in the sense that there isn't sort of a barrier between, who can be against compassion and the way of teaching that. I think I told you the story of my encounter with the Dalai Lama at Grace Cathedral when it was a totally packed cathedral, and he came in the back door. We were both in our robes. I went down the steps to meet him and fell on top of him. Didn't knock him over, but he hugged me and patted my chest and laughed, and I thought, "You're not bad,
Yeah. No.
That was a great moment of connection and generosity, and it's that generosity, I think, that is that moves mountains and gets us moving. The other thing, though, you talk about, which I'd like you to expand on a bit, is the return to the Great Mother.
Yes.
The issue of the mother. Can you say something about that?
Well, so in Buddhism, of course, the Great Mother is the great emptiness, the great container out of which everything arises. And in shamanic practice, the Great Mother is the earth.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, we have in these two traditions, we have this reference to this deep generativity, this deep creativity, this deep spaciousness that allows for the manifestation of creative and positive possibility. And that is actually, in Coming to Peace, one of the key things we try to do is to create that spaciousness.
That's what I like about your title, actually, Coming to Peace, that it's a journey. I mean, you're not going to do it, be hopeful, because you can step towards peace. The other thing that you bring about, though, is the method. And could you tell us a bit about the relationship, then, between that vision of connectedness and your practice of depth hypnosis?
Well, depth hypnosis is, of course, it brings together many aspects of both Buddhism and the earth-based practices. And in both systems, you might call it, in neither system is it called this, but in depth hypnosis, I would call it, from the depth hypnosis point of view, a theory of personality, where you have in Buddhism, it's understood that at the heart of all manifestation, including humans, there's this idea of Buddha nature.
Yes. Yeah.
And in shamanic practice, it's understood that at the heart, that what you're trying to do in healing is bring the person into connection with their core power. And so in depth hypnosis, the connectivity is with the deeper self, right? It's like restoring the person to connection with their Buddha nature and with their core power. And usually the things that separate people from their essential natures is conflict.
And then, though, you have a very interesting notion about how conflict itself is a sort of beacon, summoning us. How do you get me not to be resistant to conflict. I mean, that whole idea that conflict is a bad thing, how can it become a sort of beacon?
Well, I think if we can kind of approach whatever problems we're having as a teaching, that if we can think about, I'm having this conflict and there's something that I have to learn from it, and that you, the person that I'm in conflict with, have something to teach me, then that kind of dissolves the polarity, right? Of like you and me, and this is bad, and we can't like figure this out, and you're over there and I'm over here, right?
You reminded me actually just now of the desert tradition of spirituality, where there was a notion that the desert was a place of privileged encounter with God, and also where you went to fight the demons. And the notion of the connectivity and the solidarity, that if I went and fought with a demon and conquered it, it couldn't go and bother you. That there was a sense of solidarity, that my working on my conflict, if you like, is not just a selfish or private act, but something that serves the common good and the commonwealth. Does that make...
That totally makes sense,
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, this comes up again and again in the book, that we're all connected, that there is a deep and unbroken connectedness with our essential nature. Which brings me to the next focus, because I find in your book so helpful, is something that sounds very simplistic, but learning the art of listening.
Right.
There was E.M. Forster unkindly said, "Poor little talkative Christianity." Always yakking, always sort of instead of responding with a kind of pregnant silence and listening. So what about that listening? The idea that everyone is our teacher. Ram Dass said, everything that happens to us is our curriculum.
Yes.
And I've always liked that. What about that?
Well, in terms of listening, well, one of the ways in which listening is encouraged and kind of enforced in the Coming to Peace process is that the way the Coming to Peace process works is that you have a talking stick or a talking stone that goes around the circle of people that are involved in the conflict resolution process. And only the person who has the stick or the stone may speak.
Yes.
So, this was an absolutely revolutionary idea for the Europeans coming upon the Iroquois League and finding this process going on in the talks around the conflicts that they were having, because of course they were coming from your place, England, where, in Parliament everyone's screaming at each other and trying to outshout each other, and that's the way.
Well, how else do you get to the truth?
Well, I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. So that whole idea of having to wait until you get the stone or the stick back, you have to listen. I mean, you could check out, I guess, but
well, at least
kind of
it
enforced.
also assumes, doesn't it, a tremendous level of trust, and getting to trust so that one can hear some other from the other is quite a journey sometimes.
Well, sometimes just the act of listening will get you to a place of trust. I mean, before you don't have to necessarily establish that beforehand, because in conflict, there's hardly any trust that exists between people, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things about the container of Coming to Peace is that it provides just that, a container, so that there are some rules, and you need to speak your truth. You need to take responsibility for what you're responsible for. You need to have respect for the other person. These keys are helpful in helping people develop.
Yeah.
Exactly, ground rules.
I mean, there's 9 of them, and they're wonderful. But I mean, I suspect for some people, for example, the first one alone is a revelation, is equality.
Right.
That this person is worthy of respect, and this person is worthy of being listened to, and so on. Yes. I'm smiling because it reminded me of a bad thing I did when I was a teacher, when I first came to this country. And I would be fired now for saying this. And I remember it was a 12th grade ethics class. And one of the students said, "But Father, I have a right to my opinion." And I, without thinking, said, "Yes, and it's utterly worthless. You haven't thought about it, you haven't studied, you haven't done it." And so I think I would be fired quite appropriately now, because that's not the way to handle that. It's putting it, in terms of this method, how do you deal with error?
Error?
Error.
What kind of error?
Well, when they're speaking their truth, and it obviously is destructive or it's negative.
Well,
I mean, I'm asking really, how do you come to the issue of confrontation, if at all?
well, the thing about it is that if you can really talk about what the issue is, often that will diffuse it.
Okay, so it's
Right.
identifying
Right.
what the real issue is. Yeah.
And often you need that time and space that it takes to have the rock go around or the stick go around to actually get at what the actual issue is. And one of the things that I've seen again and again is that it is not at all uncommon that people who are in conflict with one another want the same thing.
Yes.
And it's a matter, if you can speak honestly from your heart and talk about the way in which you feel affronted by what has happened or what the other person is doing that's bothering you, then that gives the other person an opportunity to realize, I'm having an effect on the situation and on these people that I may not have intended. And that gives them the opportunity to look into their motivation or their intention in engaging with the conflict in a new way. And that in and of itself tends to bring down the temperature. Exactly. Yeah.
I think it afflicts both liberals and conservatives is in our culture is how addicted we are to certainty. That if I'm right and you're wrong, what is there to talk about?
Right. Right.
I mean, you've either got to shape it. That whole notion that another thing I admire in your book is this focus on meditation. Because it's not, as you say, it's not a belief system. It's a place of getting to peace. But so it's not sort of making a statement and saying this. The fact that, we can say true things falsely. You can have a whole lot of little truths in the service of a big lie. And so your point about meditation is to create that space where you don't have to be right. You don't have to assert this false kind of certainty about your position.
Right. There's not an objective truth that you arrive at. It's like everybody has to agree with this one point and then there will be peace. It's, I need to understand what I have done to create this situation. I need to understand what you have done to create this situation. I need to understand what I need from this situation. I need to understand what you need from this situation. And we need to figure out how we can understand one another better through that lens.
Yeah, I love that.
Right?
I mean, you say meditation, the process of quieting our mind and observing our thoughts like a puppy on a leash. I love that. The unobserved mind tries to pull us in every direction. By training ourselves to observe our thoughts and emotions before reacting to them, gives us the opportunity to create more positive interactions in the world. I love the phrase, which I think some people would be puzzled by, it saves us from thinking our thoughts are real.
Right.
And that whole principle, one of the first principles is life is not about you, which sounds pretty negative, but I find that such a relief, such a gift, that there's something else going on in our relationship. He reminded me of the two monks, the young monk and the older one, going on a long journey to the distant monastery, and it's been raining and there's been this muddy crossroads. Do you remember the story? And there's this beautiful young woman, and the older monk, she's distressed because of the mud, and he just goes and picks her up and puts her across to the other side, and then they trudge and the young monk is very angry.
Right.
And he says, "Why are you angry?" He says, "Well, we avoid beautiful women, and we don't do that." And the old monk says, "I left her behind at the crossroads."
Right.
Why are you still carrying her?
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the stories in the Buddhist tradition about getting us off center, making us a little eccentric, so that we can see the world in a different way. Now, I'm not probably a good interviewer because I like too much of what you've done. It's too good. You make a great point in the context of all this, which resonates with me because of liturgy and the sense of the sacred, which I appreciate so much, is you point out that we engage in ritual all the time. So could you talk a bit about the importance of ritual to get us to the place where we need to be?
Well, I can talk about it certainly in the context of coming to peace. So the whole process of, passing the stone, clearing this, you clear the space of any imprints that might have occurred there before you start. That is a ritual. Everyone coming in and sitting in a particular place and working with their own connecting with their own inner wisdom, that is a ritual. And the wonderful thing about ritual in general is that it connects you to something larger. So for instance, when you're doing, say, the Eucharist, you're bringing through the ritual of breaking the bread and offering the wine, you are invoking and you are drawing through the power of Christ, into the room, into the experience of everyone there. And ritual is a container. It directs energy from one place to another, right?
And that's why you begin every session with meditation, right?
Right. That's why.
Sort of setting the tone.
Right.
That issue of tonality
Yeah.
and pitch, I think, is
Right.
That's very, very, very helpful. Tell us about this, because within the book, by the way, everybody, there are sort of case studies. Which really illustrate and become concrete in human experience. You actually meet people in the book. The example of the gay man and his family, the experience for me of the cathedral being a safe place for those men in the 80s, particularly rejected by their churches or their families.
Right.
If you could tell us something about that particular issue, it's the family system example. I don't want to overburden you with too many examples, but just that particular one struck me.
Well, it's interesting because you were talking about we have to arrive at a particular place and then there's peace. But in that situation, that was a fundamentalist family who came from the South, and the 20-year-old son was coming out, and he was rejected by his father, and his mother had always followed his father's dictates, and but she had so much internal conflict because she couldn't abandon her son, and it was the godfather who brought them into the coming to peace process, and the father refused to participate, but the mother really felt like she had to examine the conflict within herself, the conflict that this situation was creating within herself that would require her to abandon her son. There was something wrong with a religious or spiritual idea that would require her to abandon her son. So she had to come to a different set of truths about what her belief was, what her faith was. And that was an agonizing process for her. And she went through it in the circle with the godfather, her son. I was there. Of course, in the facilitator in the coming to peace process is very pulled back. And then, of course, she was there, and in that going around, and in her seeing the pain that she had created in her son, and in the going around and seeing the pain that this demand that she abandoned her son created within herself, she completely transformed, and she came to peace within herself, and she. After 40 years of being in a very strict Orthodox spiritual situation made her, and in a very orthodox marriage, which required her to follow what her husband had said, she actually found her own voice for the first time. And it came out of the conflict
Yeah.
of having that she felt in being required to abandon her son. So right there, peace in the heart of conflict, right?
What you have, though, I think in these wonderful examples, is the example of the divided self,
Yes.
and then getting those divisions to talk to each other. I love the one about Joel and his anger, and he had two parts of himself: a soldier at the back of his head, and a red ball in his stomach. And I thought, well, what's that about? Then I read on.
Yeah, I know, right? What is that? What
is this woman doing here? But then it sort of hit me because you illustrated this. It was the war within taking responsibility and being tired of being responsible,
Right.
and getting those two things to talk to each other. So the work of inspecting the psyche and allowing those conflicting parts to be in conversation with each other. Do you always find that there's always they come up with things like the soldier in the head and the ball in the stomach?
There's always an interesting form that the different parts take, and the relationship between them is actually very articulated. And I know it's a little bit odd when you think about, I have these voices inside me, and I've been trying to pretend that I don't have these voices inside me for a long time now. So, I don't think I want to admit that these voices are inside of me. Yeah. But when you admit that, like for instance, he became aware of this conflict around responsibility because of conflict he was having with his stepdaughter.
Yes.
So there was, and this is one of the premises of the book, that internal conflict drives external conflict.
Yes.
So he was having these knockdown, drag-out fights with his stepdaughter because he kept trying to overcompensate for the loss of her father. And so he was trying to take responsibility for this and for this and for this. He was overdoing it, and she was like, back off, Right. And so he got angry because he got angry at himself, which he expressed at her, but he got angry at himself because he wasn't living up to his standard that he should take responsibility properly and make it better for everyone else. Right?
So shape up.
Right. That was his own thought. And so then he had this other part of himself that was like, yo, man, I just like don't bother me. I am so sick of all this saving all of the cats up every tree, I just want to chill, and so that conversation that went on between those two parts, his anger at that part of himself that didn't want to participate,
right.
and the part that didn't want to participate actually having some wisdom that he needed to take care of himself first.
Yes.
And that was a big revelation to him. And that was something, that self-care was something that was born from the conflict in the external world with his stepdaughter. And there was a huge internal change there.
That's another thing that struck me about the discernment of that is you write about radical self-responsibility, and I kind of interpreted that as blaming myself.
It's not uncommon.
Then I had to sort of work through that and confusing it with blame, but it doesn't have anything to do with punishment.
No.
But there's a sense in which getting off the treadmill of a false responsibility into being truly responsible for oneself, and that transition, it seems to me, is deeply enhanced and supported by that kind of session you have where you have meditation, then you have the conflicting parts of the self in touch with one another, and out of that conversation can come a whole new sense of what self-responsibility might be about. Does that
that is
how I get off the treadmill of blame?
Well, the first step off the treadmill of blame, and it is, you're not the only one who has that confusion about, if I take responsibility for that, I'll be blamed. It's almost everyone has that idea. But if you understand that if you take responsibility, it's simply so that you can change the situation. So if I take responsibility for having stepped on your foot, I can tell you I'm sorry, and I can touch your foot and try to help you feel better. But if I pretend that I haven't done it because I'm afraid that you're going to, think badly of me, if I say that it was me who stepped on your foot, then I don't have that opportunity to connect with you, and then I'm living with a lie within myself. The way that you get out of that treadmill that you're talking about is compassion, self-compassion. I can be compassionate toward myself because I was afraid of being punished, and I can then touch the compassion that I have for you in your suffering, and then we can feel not only connected to myself, but also connected to you. And I think that it's, when we're talking about personal responsibility, we're talking about self-compassion and compassion for others with a definite emphasis on truth.
Right. I'm moving towards the great issue of forgiveness, I think. You reminded me of a great production I saw of The Tempest years ago. And at the end of the play, Prospero puts his cloak around Caliban's shoulders and says, "This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine." And it's that acknowledgement of the shadow, that Jungian, because Jung has been a great influence on you too.
Yes.
Is this to do with the work with the shadow, this issue of responsibility, or is that a different issue?
Well, I mean, the shadow, from the Jungian perspective, the shadow is anything that you try to separate from yourself, that you reject, any aspect of your experience. So if you go into denial about what you're responsible for, then the thing that you're responsible for goes into the shadow, right? And it's actually in the coming to peace process, those experiences that we have tried to separate from or not look at or not try to understand the effect that they're having on other people are the kinds of things that are revealed in the coming to peace process, because there is the time and the space to allow that kind of unwinding to happen.
You have a big issue and centrality, wonderful centrality to forgiveness. And you quote Nelson Mandela, "As I walked out the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." So
quote, right?
that issue of incomplete forgiveness as well you write about. You say that forgiveness is more a journey than a race, and the different work for the offended and the offender, as the offender, sometimes I want to say guilty, but not as charged. I want to say.
Well,
but how? Tell us a bit why forgiveness is so central and so hard. And then we're going to open it. I've got lots of wonderful questions here for you.
Well, that's interesting when you say guilty but not as charged.
Yeah.
That is the kind of issue that emerges in the coming to peace process.
Hmm.
Yes, I'm responsible for something, but I'm not responsible for the thing you're trying to make me responsible for. That could be one aspect, right?
Right.
And I am, and you could, further, if you follow that path a little bit, I could imagine that what you might say is that, I'm hurt by the fact that you're trying to make me responsible for something that I'm not responsible for. Right. Yes, I made a mistake. Here is the mistake. But you can't kind of load me up with that issue that you have just because I made the mistake, right? And then the other person can say, "Oh, right, yeah, I figured, you screwed up there, so you probably screwed up everywhere else too, and it's not fair. I shouldn't talk to you that way." Right? So there you have this understanding where the person who's trying to kind of guilt trip the other person who has made a mistake into being worse than they actually are has to take responsibility for having been inappropriate in their condemnation and punishment of the other person for the error. And so then there is the possibility, with all of this unfolding information, for a compassionate approach to one another and peace, right?
There's some wonderful questions around this issue of forgiveness. How can we forgive those who have done us wrong? Is forgiveness necessary to heal yourself?
How can we forgive those who have done us wrong? Okay. Is it necessary to forgive yourself? Generally speaking, I'll start with the second one.
Is it necessary to heal yourself?
Is it necessary
To heal.
Let me read it.
There you go.
Thank you. Is forgiveness necessary to heal yourself? Okay, so this person, I think, has probably had the demand that they forgive someone for having harmed them when they haven't been able to fully express the harm that, or even know the harm that they've experienced at the other person's hands to that person in a way in which the other person would have been able to take responsibility, right? If that is the case, forgiving that person under those circumstances will not heal you, because you will be creating a cognitive dissonance within yourself where you have to kind of patch over your own feelings of hurt. And it's very important when you have been wronged to understand all the ways in which you have been wronged. And if you have the opportunity to work with a person who has done the harm, if they are willing to sit down in a coming to peace process with you, it's a wonderful thing for them to be able to understand. And you have to tell your truth and give them the opportunity to understand the effect and give them the opportunity to take responsibility. Because when they take responsibility, they can change, right? So you give them the opportunity to do that. And then in that case, everything has unwound. The flower has completely opened. And then healing will happen in and of itself. You don't have to have an act of forgiveness because there will be understanding and a natural healing will arise, right?
You talk about the case of Susan and Yvonne, looking at life through the sullied lens of blame and self-victimization. In that case, focused on money. And that whole issue of facing one's vulnerability is such a hard task, and that is part of that process there. A cosmic good question. Please tell us how you came to find this peace.
How I have come to find peace?
Yes.
Easy. I don't know. I don't know that I have,
Or was it in a particular, I keep wondering, was it in Saudi Arabia, or was it in a particular geographical place that you can remember, or was it a very long process?
I'm not sure exactly what this peace refers to. Is it the peace within me?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
yeah. So I have not totally come to peace with myself. I work on it every day. I haven't come to peace with all the things that have happened in my life. I work on it every day.
Yeah, as we do, yes, yeah. How long each day do you suggest meditating?
All day.
All day.
But if you can't, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. or 45 seconds.
Any amount you got.
How you do that? Yes. This whole thing about how one recognizes, without condemnation, a toxic relationship, maybe. That the question is, can all relationships heal? Well, depends. I would think on if the relationship. How do you discern?
Can I read it?
It's just a simple sentence, but very important.
Well, all relationships cannot heal unless all the parties are dedicated to peace.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that are dedicated to war. And in that with Yvonne and that family, they were dedicated to war. They would rather have the power that came out of war than to have the power that came out of peace. So that relationship would never heal. And neither one of them as individuals will ever heal until they begin to understand the downside of being at war.
Yeah.
Right.
So I love Ram Dass's line about, was it, that we're, in the end, we're all seeing each other home, or
Right. That's right.
We're all walking each other home.
Right. Right.
And if you reject that, there's no
healing.
no healing
Right.
at all.
Right.
Yeah. I was hesitating to bring this up, but I know it's on our minds, and let's make it a general thing. And I'm glad the person wrote it down. What can the top political leaders learn about conflict resolution? Or what would be your agenda for Congress, maybe?
Well,
The White House.
I mean, the way that, the container of coming to peace requires everyone to connect with their own inner wisdom. And if you are very far from your own inner wisdom, that's going to take a while, right? So just the process of connecting with with each members of Congress' inner wisdom would be probably quite a bit of therapy.
Yes.
Right? So that would be really helpful, right?
Yes.
And that would be
And
therapeutic.
your point about
right?
truth.
Right. So and if you are truly connected with your own inner wisdom, you have a lot more trouble lying, right? And you have a lot more trouble trying to beat the other one out, or trying to one up the other person. So just, so that would be my recipe is, can we sit and connect with our own inner truth? What is true for us? And what is it that we want for ourselves and for others, actually, when it's not about waging war, right? And, when we are dedicated to truth, when we are dedicated to respect, if those people would sit down and think about how respectful they are being as they take away all of the benefits that these people in Brooklyn, for instance, will not have now with their heating situation, how much respect are they demonstrating, right? So, it's like if we sit down with these principles and we look at what our relationship is to those principles and we act from that place, we will act differently. The other really important aspect of coming into a container like coming to peace is that all of the hierarchies are broken.
Yeah.
Right? So if you were to put the people in Brooklyn who are sitting in front of their stoves trying to stay warm because their subsidies were cut off while, Trump Towers adds, yet another story of luxury apartments, then you would have those people sit down with the people that are making the decisions and have them listen to the effect of their decisions on these people who are sitting in front of their stoves. And they have to listen. They are not better. They can't shut them out. They can't say, you're fired. They have to listen. And I think that, again, that listening, if they refuse to listen, then they are asked to take a step outside the circle, reconnect with their inner wisdom, and they can then listen to the effect of them refusing to listen as everyone else talks about that. So there's this incredible process of learning that is not possible when you're in this sort of king position, I don't have to deal. When you have everyone on an equal level, you have to deal.
What hits me is that then with that kind of dark view, it then is overlaid with a high moral tone. That is to say, helping people is bad for their character. That whole notion that you then justify your indifference or your cutting off from people from a kind of a vision of freedom where if you help people, it stops them from being self-reliant.
Well, I think being in a circle where you're cutting off subsidies for people to keep them from being self-reliant, that in an effort to help them become self-reliant, I think you'll get information very quickly that is not actually working.
Not actually working.
Right? Yeah. Right. So.
I know, but you get that. Oh, it's the moralism of indifferent. Of an indifferent.
Just justification.
It is. Yeah.
It's just justification.
A very important question, which I'm glad has come up because thinking of the world in which we live, this whole relationship of technology and spirituality, does technology increase our connection with each other? That whole notion that we're all becoming cyborgs and that we'll have a lifespan of 1,000 years, and You know, what on earth would that do to us spiritually?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the issues with technology is that people tend to disconnect from the natural world when they're engaging with technology, from what I've seen. And although there's many technologies that help people kind of reestablish the natural world, you know, there's all of this new technology that's happening. I was listening on NPR the other day where there's this fellow who has figured out how to, with technology, kind of create krill so that he can repopulate the krill populations so that the other animals can then begin to live and they can repopulate the oceans. Well, we wouldn't need technology to do that if technology hadn't destroyed the oceans, right? I mean, I know that's a big statement, but and it's not totally true, but I think that this industrial technological race to, I don't know, get the most money, have the biggest thing. I don't really understand what the point of it is, but it seems to have something to do with competition and having more than anyone else. That is part of the whole industrial technological thrust. And if you can get that thrust moving toward nature, great. But I see it moving generally away from nature.
Right.
And for me, nature is the earth, you know, doing what is right for the earth first is going to be the thing that saves all of us. So if you can get technology working in that direction, then that would be a wonderful way to bring a relationship between the earth and technology.
I think you made me think of a little bit. A friend of mine who does love me says, your problem, Alan, is that you have an inclination towards melancholy. Because I enjoyed your book and I enjoy our conversation, and then I heard on the news today, for example, that child obesity is enormous and not being improved in this country, and that I think 1/5 of children are all obese and so on. And I sort of said, another issue, a whole issue, staggering from issue to issue in terms of, so technology is one thing, child obesity, we've got the whole thing, the problem with our politics. What are we going to do with DACA, all those sort of things. So that whole issue of being on sort of being overwhelmed by so many issues and realities, and how one kind of, so that you're not treating spirituality as a sort of an escapist route, but as a way of confronting things, but in a way that's creative rather than debilitating and destructive.
Right, and I think that the way that I always say in depth hypnosis when I'm teaching, pathology is grounding. So if you stay with your upset, like rather if you're worried about spirituality, rather than deny it or try to get away from it, if you stay with it and you engage it, like you feel, like that's why I had that emotion come up, because there's so much that I'm not at peace with, right? There's so much going on that, like how do I come to peace with the fact that the polar bears are dying? How do I deal with that, right?
I know.
So I have to deal with this grief, right?
Yeah.
I have to understand, where is this grief coming from? And then how do I bring compassion to myself and to the polar bears, right?
Yeah.
And how do I hold all of that? And that work, that is really important work, because then when I meet someone, who's in conflict, I can sit with them and I can say, yes, I see how you're in conflict. I can be here compassionately with you because I've been there compassionately with me, right? And I have a greater capacity. And I have it all the time among all my students. I can't tell you how many people, they come in, they literally stagger into the Sacred Stream Center and collapse in the circle, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm here." It's like, because it is a refuge, but it's a refuge where we look at those things that are troubling us. And if we engage and look internally at what our own our own responses and resolve our own response, we have created spaciousness and goodness and peace in the world. We have changed our corner of the world, and that is going to be good for the collective, right? You don't have to be out throwing stones at the tanks, which is one of my favorite things that I used to do as a kid. But as I get a little older, a little wiser, try
Well,
another approach.
That whole better to light a candle and curse the darkness.
Right, exactly. Brilliant.
Yes. That whole thing. You reminded me actually of a great thing in the desert tradition of the gift of tears, of not just remorse, but the whole thing of we've got hardness of heart, and our hearts need moistening, and that kind of sense of the sadness of things and being able to acknowledge it is a way of softening so that the heart can operate.
Right.
Some more, and
Right.
I love that kind of image, and thank you for that.
And in Buddhism, that concept is described as samsara.
Yes, right.
It's the realm of
The
suffering.
cycle, yeah.
The realm of suffering that is predicated upon your attachments and your aversions and your misconceptions. And attachments, aversions, and misconceptions are the flour, milk, and eggs of the cake of conflict, right?
And you're baking it all the time.
Right, right. And so if you can let go, like when you see the effect of your aversion on someone, or if you see the effect of your attachment of things having to be a particular way on someone who's responding honestly and in a non-blaming way to the effect of being in the presence of your usual way of defining yourself, there can be a possibility for change, right? And because the container of the circle is there, and because you have this connection with your inner wisdom that is part of the first meditation, you have something to hold you.
Yeah.
And in depth hypnosis, it's all about connecting with this deeper part of the self and then kind of chipping away at all of the different aversions, attachments, and misconceptions that are keeping you from standing fully in your own potential, right?
A Benedictine monk once said to me, just because you've experienced it doesn't mean it really happened. And by the same token, just because it really happened doesn't mean you've experienced it. Is that experience is a mixture of an event and interpretation.
Right.
And we get caught. I think one of your great gifts is to get off that treadmill of circular interpretation all the time. There's a plea here in a question which you sort of feel that wrenching. How do you be the bigger person when others are committed to belittling? Why do we make it so hard to get along? What is it that attracts us to that negativity, your point about samsara?
The first thing is it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. What matters is what you're doing, right? Someone can be cruel and cutting and harsh, and it's your response to it that is important. And it's like you don't have to be a bigger person, but you just have to respond compassionately. And you have to see, one of the things that you see immediately is that the person who's being belittling is probably doing that because they're in a lot of pain. People aren't cruel if they're not in pain. This is why self-kindness is so important. And why do we make it so hard to get along? I think it's a very good question, and I think that the reason that we make it hard to get along is because we have gotten disconnected from ourselves, and we don't know how to get along. And yet, we have nature all around us, showing us how to get along. And we just need to step into that awareness and try to incorporate it into the way that we treat each other, right?
I mean this seriously, actually. We have an 8-pound rescue dog that looks like a cross between a squirrel and a badger. And I've decided, she was called Tina Turner by the thing because of, anyway, never mind why. We call her Tigger. And for us, this little dog and I don't mean this as a sentimental way, is become a kind of spiritual director in terms of not sort of looking down at but really an equal fellow creature with lots to teach us. It's been a great, an unexpected gift in that sense. I've always liked dogs, but I mean, this particular little beast is it's not that I look, as if I'm superior to it. I mean, it's actually understanding, which I get from the book, is a sense of solidarity. This back to the issue which we started with of connection, and realizing. I tell people that I only now have two truths. One is everybody matters, and the second is we're in this together, and the rest are footnotes to that, and how we do that. We're going to be coming towards the end of this, and I want you to talk a bit about the four immeasurables. They are reminding people what they are: equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, and joy. And I think we're beginning to draw to an end here, to really explore something of those four amazing immeasurables.
Well, the important thing to remember about these four qualities is that they are the they are the essence of what in Buddhism might be called the enlightened mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the Buddhist project is to become more aware, more conscious, more understanding of yourself and the nature of the world around you. And as you move into that greater understanding, that is a movement toward enlightenment. And as your mind expands and as your awareness expands, your ability to have equanimity, compassion, loving kindness, and empathetic joy also expands. But you can also practice those qualities in meditation in order to understand what within you is separating you from the enlightened state. Because, for instance, equanimity, it sounds like, that sounds kind of innocuous.
Yeah.
What is that? Equal? But actually, you try to do an equanimity meditation, and I actually, if you're interested in trying these meditations out, I have, all four are on the sacredstream.org website. You can download them and practice. But equanimity, this meditation is there. So with equanimity, you practice looking at someone that you really hate. Of course, you have to admit that you hate them, right? You look at someone that you really dislike or judge, and you try to see them with engaged neutrality, not indifference, engaged neutrality. And you meditate upon them, and you keep coming back, and you keep pulling yourself back. What do I need to do in order to pull myself back? What do I need to address? And you'll find you have all these it's like you're opening up the toy chest, and out comes the rusty can, out comes a pair of scissors, out comes all these different things that shouldn't be in the toy chest, right? And you have to deal with every one of them in order to get to the place where you can actually see that person with engaged neutrality. And then you do the same thing with someone that you love. And that's a whole different process. You have to, in the first, you have to deal with your aversions. In the second, you have to deal with your attachments.
Yeah.
And, at first people go, why would I want to get to a place of neutral indifference? Neutrality, not indifference, to the person I love, because you're over-attached, right? Yeah. So you have to move to there.
Equanimity is really active and not zonking out, not sort of flattening stuff out.
And the hardest one is getting into a place of active neutrality with someone that you feel indifferent toward. Yeah. Right? Each one of those is a different process, a different movement within the self. And that's just, and all of the effort that you do to get to the place where you can engage with this neutral engagement with the world, that changes you. Imagine walking around with this neutral engagement. You would be a different person, right? More expanded. There's more possibility. more ability to be with whatever is.
It's actually, I was trained in an Anglican monastery for priesthood, and the prior, shocked us by saying love, first of all, is a matter of policy. And that was the sort of equanimity.
Right.
And we thought that was, we wanted all the emotion but no, it was that kind of sense of equanimity there. I thought that, and I've only slowly come in to see what he was on about in terms of, there's a phrase in one of Iris Murdoch's novels where about a woman saying she enlarged herself by interfering.
Right. A lot of people do that. We all know somebody doing that.
That withdrawal of the self. We have to come to a conclusion. You quote Mother Teresa. If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. Right. And I think that's what I get from your book and the exercise, is what it is to belong to each other. We're all seeing each other home, and to come back to that sense of the common good and the commonwealth, that we're in, there isn't that separation.
Right.
And to find that that's a life's work.
Right.
And yes, it is better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And also, I want to thank you for helping us come to peace. We've reached the point in our program where we have to say thank you and goodbye. Our thanks to Dr. Isa Gucciardi, founding director of Foundation for the Sacred Stream, author of this new book, which I thoroughly recommend, Coming to Peace, Resolving Conflict Within Ourselves and with Others. I want to thank our audiences here and on the radio, television, and on the internet. I want to remind you, everyone here, that copies of Isa's book are for sale, and you should buy more than one, actually, because you need to be able to give one away. She'd be pleased to sign the books outside this room immediately following the program. I'm Alan Jones, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know, is adjourned. You were terrific.
Thank you so much.